Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for the second session of our technology teaching workshops. Today, we have the honor and privilege of having Professor Lynn Ramey from the French and Italian Department at Vanderbilt. And joining us, returning to Vanderbilt virtually, is Abby, also from the French department, but at High Point University. So today, the session will focus on Perusall, Ecomma, and lots of digital tools and platforms, especially for reading socially online. So without any further ado, please, wave, I guess, say hello to Lynn and Ramey as they talk us through our Perusall. Take the floor.
Okay, so Abby and I had talked about, who to go first and whatnot. And to me, it makes sense for Abby to go first because you hear about why you would want to do this because she's an expert in this area. This is what she did her dissertation on. So I'm like introducing Abby in a way. But she, some of the first things I learned about social reading, I learned from Abby. So she's got the real theoretical background on why you would want to do it, what it does for students, and what it does in the language classroom. And then when she's done, I'll kind of just go over Perusall as we use it at Vanderbilt.
Great. That's exactly what I'm going to talk about. This is basically going to be a mini version of my dissertation presentation. So basically why I chose to do social reading and the results. So let me share my screen. Oh, we don't use Zoom at High Point, so I'm having to open my system preferences. I'm sorry.
What do you use if you don't use Zoom? Oh, because you're in person.
we use WebEx. Oh no, I have to quit and rejoin. I will be back in 30 seconds.
Okay.
Danielle, are you the host?
Yes, I am.
Oh, because, okay. Usually to share your, be the host, right?
Oh no, you can also click the option of multiple people can share the screen.
Danielle, can you just make it so that it's not multiple people can share the screen, but one can share at a time? Is that okay? Because I found it works better for showing screens and video. It's just, I can't remember why. I looked it up. But.
Yeah, absolutely. Just did it. Here's Abby. She's joining us again.
I'm back. And here we go. Okay, is it working?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So my dissertation was called Social Reading, Developing a Multi-Literate Community in the French Classroom. And so that's what I was aiming to do was how can we promote literacy? And there I am in my robes at our at-home graduation. So I came about my dissertation because of the triangulation between sociocultural theory, where we're talking about interpreting and making meaning, the entire literacies framework, whether that's literacies in general or multi-literacies, and then the whole concept of using digital tools and social reading where students are collaborating outside of the classroom. Even if they're doing it inside the classroom, they're still collaborating within their own heads versus speaking to one another out loud. And my preliminary overarching research question was basically, how does social reading contribute to the development of language awareness, critical reflection, and the interpretive mode? And I was relying on ACTFL's definition of the interpretive mode. And so they just say that interpretive communication is where learners understand, interpret, and analyze what is heard, read, or viewed. They use the language to investigate, explain, and reflect, and learners access and evaluate information and diverse perspectives. And one of the main problems that I had with the interpretive mode is that most often the word interpret was used in the definition. And so I was trying to pinpoint what it actually means and what it looks like for students to interpret meaning. And my fundamental theoretical framework was literacy, and just the overarching concept of literacy being really broad, right? So literacy is the use of socially, historically, culturally situated practices, a wide range of cognitive abilities. You have to know the written and the spoken language. And so basically, Kern back in 2000 was just saying that literacy is so much more than reading. And I think that sometimes our learners get caught up in having to know every word. And I think that when you frame literacy as this overall meaning-making process, it can help students become more comfortable with texts. And then, of course, we have multi-literacies frameworks, which Elise Petit works on. And in multi-literacies, you're basically expanding upon literacies and helping learners negotiate differences with one another. And so students are working together to make and understand meaning. And when I think about any tools in the classroom, I really like looking at Puentendora's model, where he talks about how tools can either enhance or transform the learning experience. And I think that not every tool that we use in the classroom has to be transformative, because it's such a huge goal. But I do think that the way that we can frame our tools in the classroom, how can we transform the activity and really have our goal as educators? So why are we using this tool, and what does it do that, we weren't already doing in the classroom? And so in my opinion, social reading, it does redefine the way that students read, because they're reading, they're able to look up, and then they're sharing, and then it creates a multi-layered text, which they wouldn't have access to on their own. So social reading really came about in around 2009, when the University of Texas at Austin introduced Ecomma. And this is social reading in the foreign language context, because text annotation has been around for a while. Ecomma, so when I was at Vanderbilt, we were having a lot of trouble integrating Ecomma into the LMS, and I don't know if that's still true. But Ecomma, it limits your word count, but it's the original tool, and it was a great way to get started. And so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but if you ever have any questions or want to use it, it is a good tool, but it is a little bit dated. And that's the trouble that we come into with a lot of digital humanities projects, right? Is the people who work on them, they leave and they're not maintained. And so Ecomma's interface is not as snazzy as Perusall's at all. But Carl Blythe, who works at UT Austin and has done most of the preliminary and primary research on social reading, says that social reading is the online collaborative reading process where users annotate text and interact with others while reading. And he stated that online reading is changing our understanding of what it means to read by blurring the line between private interpretation and public discussion. And so that's true. So when you think about reading, it's a private solo activity. And when you open up your thoughts to others, it transforms the way that you interpret the text. And from doing my dissertation, what I realized was that social reading it forms this triangulation between individual learners, the computer, and other learners. And so there's a lot of talk about using digital tools where there's this binary or bidirectional relationship between the individual and the computer. And so how are we using the computer to mediate our understanding? And so I took this and I said that social reading takes it one step forward and triangulates it. So I had 3 primary research questions. How do students interact in a social reading format? In what ways does social reading affect students' interpretive abilities? And in what ways does social reading of a literary text promote a sense of cultural awareness of the world and students' roles in it? And this was from a 4th semester French class from the spring of 2019. Basically I had 15 students and I split them into 4 groups, and I did this just by going straight down the roster. So I didn't make these groups intentionally. And what we did was every Friday, we devoted the class exclusively to the reading of the literary text. So in class is where I would, give many cultural presentations, students would interact. And then on Mondays and Wednesdays, the class was focused on grammar and traditional language structures. And I co-taught this class with Virginia Scott, and that was an amazing learning experience. And so throughout the semester, they engaged on the social reading platform 4 times. And they were posting 1 comment and then responding to everybody in their group. And I'll talk a little bit more about the success of that later. The book that we read was Kif Demain by Faiza Gen, published in 2004. The author was 19 when she published it. And so it's written in a very spoken French, colloquial, it's youthful, there's a lot of slang expressions, and it's incredibly rich culturally, but it's also linguistically rich. And because of that, it's pretty complicated, right? All of these slang words are not taught traditionally in the classroom. And so social reading is a great way to decipher meaning and look up all of these expressions that students might not know. So I use the tool Live Margin, social book, and it has not changed much in the year since I've used it. And it is an external tool. So this is not going to be one that's integrated into a learning management system. And whether that's a problem or not for, FERPA purposes, is up to you to decide. But I really liked it because it was so easy to use. And when Lynn talks about Perusall, it looks pretty similar. Perusall's a little bit more academically focused, whereas this one is very bare bones, streamlined. You highlight the text, you post a comment, and then you can like it, and then reply. And so it creates threads of text chains. And I had to upload the text myself. And so I had an e-version of the novel where I would copy and paste. And then because in the beginning I didn't know how much I was going to be doing, I copied and pasted too much. And so even though I didn't post more than 10% onto the site, I had to end up typing, basically transcribing the novel myself into Word, copying and pasting. And I was working a lot with the concept of fair use copyright. And I think we did everything right, but you always have to keep that in mind, right? You can't upload more of the text than is permitted, and you can only use it within private academic groups. So these groups were completely closed to the public. And after the students uploaded their comments, I used the tool in vivo to code them, to store all of my data. So just a little snapshot of what you can do with qualitative data, which is great. And I just wanted to point this out. So the top 5 codes that I came up with were character interpretation, personal thought, general comment thought, textual interpretation. But these 2, personal thought and character interpretations, were everywhere. So what this says immediately is that when students are asked open-ended questions, and the task was very simple. It was basically write a comment about something that you find interesting from this week's reading. And we'll talk about task design later because this task was so general. And so without any guidance, students automatically are interpreting the characters and providing I statements. I think this, I feel this makes me feel like this. And so they're bringing it back to themselves. And after I read all of their comments and interactions, I was able to axial code it into 4 different categories. So of all of the comments that students were making, they either fell into a cultural analysis, an interactional analysis where they're talking to one another, something that was personal, where they're relating it to themselves, or specifically textual, where they're pointing out language instances or referring back to the text. So now I'm just going to give one example from each of the 3 research questions to show you the kinds of comments that students were making. So the first research question was basically, how do students interact? What are they doing on this social reading platform? And this related mostly to the open codes of interactional and personal. And I think that when Lynn talks about Perusall, it has a huge advantage over Social Book, because for Social Book, you don't have to respond in a chain format. And so what happened was sometimes students' comments would get lost. And so if you look at the chart, Jade, that comment thread is what it should look like. Jade posts a comment, Madison responds to Jade, Valeria responds to Madison, Elijah responds to Valeria, and then they can all see that and all have a conversation. But what was happening was sometimes the comments were getting layered behind one another and getting lost. And so when something like Madison's comment happening, where everybody is responding directly to Madison, it didn't create as much of a conversation. And so I think as the instructor, you have to go in there and remind them to keep interacting with one another and not make it bidirectional. Because when that happened, honestly, I don't even know if the other three students saw each other's replies because they were hidden behind one another as opposed to in a chain. And so just one simple example of the personal, Jade says, I think your idea that the feelings of the culture are more important is very interesting. So they use this word interesting a lot. I think this is interesting. But in this case, she's responding directly to another student. So she doesn't think the text is interesting. She thinks that the student's interpretation of the text is interesting. And we had another student who says, if we consider our lives, we do a lot of things for our future careers and for our education. We lose sleep, we have a lot of stress, and we are in competition all the time. Student health is horrible, mentally and physically. And this comment was in response to a part of the text where the single mother is very stressed because she's working this incredibly demanding job and she doesn't have time for her daughter. And so we have this Vanderbilt student who's relating it back to her own life as a student and the stressors that she experiences. And so while they're not the same at all, she is applying the general concept of this character has stress in the novel. I also have stress in my own life. In terms of the second research question, this was related specifically to the interpretive mode. So how are students interpreting the text and what does it mean to actually see their interpretations in their comments? And in general, I found some open codes such as cultural interpretation, character interpretation, and textual interpretation. So you'll see what I mean. And of the total comments, about 20% was dedicated exclusively to character interpretation. And so since this novel was written in the first person, they're mostly making character interpretations about the main character. So one student says, she's really independent. She feels the need to protect others. She's protective of her mother. She shows her love, and she will always defend them. And so this is where sometimes you'll hear scholars talk about reading between the lines. So what does it mean to read between the lines? Nowhere in the text, does Doria really ever assert her independence except in her conversations, her interactions. And so this student is going straight out and making a character interpretation about the main character. And then finally, students were talking about culture. And this novel, it presents sort of a destabilizing view of Paris because the main characters, they live in the banlieue, so the like the government-assisted housing in the outskirts of Paris. There's no romantic museums and Eiffel Towers and walks along the Seine. And so this whole idea of Paris is totally foreign to what students have in their heads, especially if they haven't been to France. And so when students are making cultural references, they're talking about cultural interpretation, cultural relations. They talked a lot about discrimination and racism. Foreign means that they highlighted that something, they used that word, like Doria is foreign or her mom is a foreigner. They talk about immigration, media, poverty, and socioeconomic statuses and stereotypes. And you'll see here that sometimes their cultural interpretations were not always accurate. So one student says, Doria is from Morocco and Moroccan culture declares that a young woman must get married. So first of all, the main character, Doria, was born in France. So even though she has Moroccan heritage, I think sometimes they made these leaps where, they're imagining that she was also born in Morocco. And then sometimes they're not understanding the subtleties, right? So this is a huge, gross generalization of culture. Moroccan culture says this, and so she has to do this. And then I think the other students come and add their nuance as well. And then one student in this same comment thread, he responded to this by saying, Doria hasn't decided yet which culture she really belongs to, so her ideas about women's liberation and her place in the world are confused in her mind. And so I thought this was a really great follow-up. So one student makes a comment that is making an assertion about a culture, and then we have other students that follow up behind her and add their point of view that gives a little bit more of a well-rounded vision of the cultural interpretation. So finally, I'm just going to offer some insights. So from all of my research, what I found was that that students do engage in critical reflection and interpretation when using a social reading platform. And I think that when we walk around the class and students are speaking, it can be hard to record that. We know that they're having good conversations and making interpretations, but unless they're writing and turning it in or presenting, it's not always documented. I think that social reading gives students agency to connect personal experiences with the text, which increases personal reflections and provides a space to do so. And by getting all of these firsthand personal reactions out on the page, it allows them in class the ability to really dive into textual analysis. Because especially at this intermediate mid-level, the I is very important. I think that's the first comment that they make. I think this, I felt this when reading it, I agree, I disagree, I like it, I don't like it, I think it's interesting. And so if we can get all of those out on the page, then they can move beyond that in the classroom. Social reading decreases the potential anxiety of reading what appears to be a daunting text. And I didn't do any research in terms of anxiety. And so this is something I definitely want to pursue in the future. But I will say that when students came to class, they were always prepared to interact with each other. And I don't know if this was because of the group and the classroom culture that we created, or if it was because we had done this flipped classroom literature style where they were forced to respond before coming, which means that they already had formulated ideas. One, not necessarily a downside, but students do maintain a classroom mindset and they need training for using these tools. And so what I found was when I gave students a really open-ended task, it was hard for them to get out of the traditional academic context. And by that, I mean that they were not fully using the multimodal experience. And then finally, social reading, of course, is not a substitute for classroom discussion. It transforms the reading experience and enhances the classroom, but it does require guided follow-up discussion. But I think that especially now in this climate of learning at home, social reading is a great way to get the conversation started. And finally, I hope we can have a conversation at the very end about task design, because this is going to be the most important thing for success when using a tool like this. So I think it's important that we consider what kinds of tasks, or specifically the questions, engage students to explore all of the aspects of a text. So we really need to pinpoint what we want them to focus on. And finally, we have to explicitly encourage students to transform this reading experience. Because if we do not say, oh, go find a photo, can you think of a song, can you insert the link, they won't do it on their own. And so the need for explicit instruction on how to make the most out of these tools is necessary. And that's what I've got. Now I would love to take a deep dive into Perusall with Lynn.
Great. I don't have I'll share my screen in a minute when, so yeah, Abby. I'll stop it. There you go, that's perfect. Okay. Okay, so full disclaimer, I am not an expert in Perusall. I started using it last year, even before the pandemic, just because I wanted something I don't know, I like to try new technology in the classroom, honestly. And it sounded good. I was reading about it maybe in the Chronicle of Higher Education or somewhere. And I thought, this sounds like I'd like to try it. And I see Bryant's here, and his class. He was in a grad class where I used it, and for my other classes last year, I can honestly say it made a huge difference. Not like a little difference, but like a huge difference in terms of getting good comments once we got to class. So. Full disclosure, I didn't always read all the comments before class. I usually did. I at least glanced through them, but it didn't really, that wasn't the point of it. The point of it was to get students thinking as they were reading, and also to get them interacting with each other. And it completely did that. So I was very enthusiastic about it, and wanted to use it once we did move online. I talked to Stacy about it. She said it was already in the in Brightspace, but actually it was not. So they had to add it. They had Ecomma because of Abby, but I just wanted to try this one. So I'm just going to tell you about what I know and how I use it, and answer any questions, and also say that there are limitations. There's things I don't know, and there's a lot of things also the Center for Teaching doesn't know yet, just because they have not been using it for that long. Okay, let me share my screen then, and just kind of go through this. I did do a little workshop with this guy who started it. He did a workshop over the summer, and this kind of blows my mind. So he's a physics professor at Harvard who just decided he wanted his students to read better, and so created this thing. So I'm like, I don't know. That's awesome. I think it has a different perspective than some other things. Let me close my email so you don't have to look at that. So what I thought I might do is kind of go through what I do when I add something to Perusall and how it kind of flows. So first thing, actually, I think I need to share my entire screen and not just that. So let me unshare. That is the hardest part, unsharing, I have to say. You have to find the right tab. Okay, now let's start the whole screen. Okay, so I'm going to start with this, which I just added, because it's a great bad example of the worst case scenario of what can happen. So basically, you just have to have a PDF of an article that you want the students to read. And this is the one I want to start with. Okay, so this article by Moretti, it's actually, this isn't even the worst case scenario, because there's another one. I'm going to open it up for you. But what happens is you can see that it's not that easy to read and everything. Let me go back in, sorry, for this one, which is even worse. That is the, sorry. Because I think this, giving you that example will actually show you what can happen if you don't have a good text. So this one, okay, I'm going to let it do that thing. But what it was doing was trying to read the text because I have Adobe. So this is tip number one, and that is get Adobe Acrobat, because your text needs to have already been OCR'd. Now, there are lots of different ways to do that, but it's in fact, the photocopiers at Furman will do it if it's set properly. So it just depends on the settings of your scanner as to whether it has enough information to actually make text out of it. But I'm going to reopen that and show you what happens. It's definitely worth it to get that. So it prepares it for reading, and that's where it's kind of identifying these letters and everything. All right, so once you've got that, then what you do is you go over to Brightspace, and let me put you guys over here, and start an assignment. So I'm going to kind of double up an assignment that they have for tomorrow. So activities and assignments. I've been doing this several different ways, but basically I'm going to do it this particular way in order to potentially make it grade itself, because this is another thing that I'm really interested in. I know Abby had to go through all of those and assign them the comments, you know, she had to tag them basically. And I don't think she did this, although it doesn't matter whether she did or not, but she would also have to say, was that a good comment or not? And that's what Perusall will do for you. It will, now it's an AI so it's a computer that's giving this information. It's not always correct. You definitely want to go in and look at the grades it gave, but nonetheless, it's kind of helpful and it gives students feedback. So they can't just put nothing or put, you know, just random remarks and get graded. But here's the assignment as it is already right here, and it opens up in Perusall. But I'm going to create a new assignment, and I'm going to call it test or something. So actually, I can't do that. I have to call it what it is. And the reason is you have to go back into, hang on. All right, so here I am in Perusall. Once I am in Perusall, I want to add that document first. So let me do that. Go back to my courses. This is my class. And I want to add the document. So I've already put it in there, but I'm going to do it anyway with a different name. Sorry. Under library, add. And now I'm going to add. Now this is, I find interesting, and I really want to try our video. So you can have video that students can comment on. That was a big request last year at CSLS. I remember people wanting to, you know, how do you have a film class, say, and have students comment on the films or on film clips? So I'm looking forward to using that. I just haven't had the need for it, and they just added it. But you can add a whole folder, or you can just add a web page. That is iffy sometimes whether it works or not. But I want to just add a document from my computer. So I'm going to add this one, but I'm going to call it something else. So it was the one, actually, I'll do this one because it's not been, no, this one. Yeah, we'll do this one because I know it's pretty bad. Okay, so as you can see, it's starting to process it and add it to your library. Once it's added to your library, you know, I think I'm just going to cancel that because I've already added it. So there it is. Okay. And I want to create an assignment. All right. So when I want to create an assignment, I just go in here and I take whatever it is that so add assignment, content to assign, and I can add the Jockers article. Okay. And you can add parts of it. You don't have to add the whole thing. I've uploaded a book before. Now, okay, so on the copyright issue, there's a couple of things. One is that you can actually adopt your course textbook through this, so it will take care of that. So they do handle that for you if you want them to. But if you have an entire book or anything, like, let's say you had all the students, I think this would actually be legitimate copyright-wise, but I'm not a lawyer. But let's say you had every student by L'étranger, you know, so the stranger, Camus' The Stranger, and then you scanned it yourself and put up the pages and said, okay, for Tuesday, I want you to read pages 1 to 12. Then I believe that would be okay, because they have paid for it and it's just a copy of what they've paid for. But at any rate, that's how it would work. You can also just more easily perhaps adopt it through Perusall, or you can find it in another source. What doesn't work so well is e-textbooks, but that's a different thing. Okay, so you assign whatever pages you want. So let's assign pages 1 or 1 to 4. And next, this is when it's due. This is the name. This is probably going to confuse them horribly because I'm adding this to their assignment that is due Thursday. But you can give it a name. So I'm going to go ahead. And maybe that'll make it pretty clear. Don't do this. next steps. All of this, I never change anything about this. This I have done, however, and it's very helpful, assigned to specific students. Sometimes I'll have I used to have, say, 3 articles, and I would say, okay, everybody just pick one article. And sometimes they all pick the same article. So what I like about this is I can pick specific students and have, these 4 read this article, and then they can report back to the group about their things. So I really do like that quite a lot. And then that's it. So it creates it down here. And it's already under, that was one of the questions when I added it was, what date do you want it to be due? And so it's due for next Thursday when we have class. Okay, but how does it look in Brightspace? Okay, sorry, let's go back to Brightspace. I'm going to cancel that. Okay. So through the teacher part, if you want to add an assignment that's from outside, you go into, I think I'm right here, Module 3. I just started using checklists because students seem to like it, but I'll show you a different way. So you just take, I want to add an existing activity from an external learning tool. Okay, so it's a Perusall, there it is, alphabetical order. It's a Perusall activity, so it's already in Brightspace as a possibility, and there it is. It just added it to the end, and then you can edit it from there. But when students click on it, this is what they'll see. It'll take them straight into Perusall, and then they for themselves will pick, okay, I know it's due on Thursday, so I'll work on this. And then what does it look like? So let me take you to what students would be looking at. I'm going to go back to this one because I know I got some really good comments on this one. Okay. So over here on the right, you can see the different people, all the different comments that I started out with, just showing them how it works. And then they can do things. And these are, for instance, let's look at one. Okay. I think it's really interesting how the field is described in such contrasting ways. And then there is a reaction to this. Yeah, I think this interaction between technologies and traditional humanities, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's long. All I told them was just make 2 comments and make 1 response to someone else's. And the AI scored this at 2 out of 2. So it scores 0 is like you didn't do it or you did a really crappy job. 1 is, for some reason, it doesn't like it if you only ask questions. So that's something to tell your students is, I have one student who's kind of the typical humanities student who's like, says everything that's really a statement as a question. And, and so all of her stuff is great, but it's being scored as a 1, whereas it really should be a 2. So I have to go back through and score it as a 2 sometimes. And 2 is, really good. So I see it as, it's up to you to decide what that means in your grading system, but it gives you that. And it will also connect it to your grade book. And this is where I'm struggling. Because it's a little more than a little complicated about how to add it to your grade book. But I'm going to go with what I've recently done and see how it works. But if I have an assignment like the one I just did, Jocker's evidence microanalysis, it seems to like it if you take that. So you make a new assignment, you take the title from Perusall. If you remember over here under this test, you can copy the full title for LMS. See right there on the right? So you copy it and it's on your clipboard. So set this to be the title of your assignment in your LMS. And I go back to here and I make that, is it letting me, oh, I have to, sorry. I make that the title. I just cut and paste it in there and it wants you to do it that way for some reason. And there it is. And then you tell it in grades, I want it to be, and I'd already said, set up my grade book, that I want it to be, it's already linked, but a part of discussions and class homework. So I give students, whatever kind of discussions and class homework, all of that goes into about, I think it's 15% of their grade or something like that. So it should work. I just don't know yet whether it's working. That's my only real question about that. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to add about this. Okay, so I went over, you need to find a scan of your book or article, or you can use a video. I'm imagining that the video needs to be relatively short. That's the only thing. I tried it in the little class and I know it will work. My question is, could you really upload an entire film? And I don't know, or adopt the film through that. That would be great. And then you open it with something that will read it and OCR it. Okay, and then you add the assignment to Brightspace and then grading potentially. Let me go show you one more thing about what happens because it will happen to you, and then you just don't know why your students are confused. So I did a little video actually for my students on what happens on how to use Perusall and what happens when it sees it as an image rather than as an OCR text. So let me go in here to, so I'm really going to quickly delete that because I don't really want my students to do it. Right here. Okay, now when they go into this assignment, so they've got the Moretti and the Jockers, and I believe it's the Jockers that's really poorly done. Oh, shoot, I have to be a student. Okay. I have to say, I have pity for my students. There's so much clicking involved with Brightspace, like finding this thing, finding that thing. But I am starting to use these checklists because they seem to like that. But here is Jockers evidence microanalysis. So what does it look like? Here's the link to Perusall. It'll take them there. It'll open it in Perusall. And once they're there, and they want to do something, see how it doesn't know that it's normally you get a text highlighting box, and I'll show you another one. But this one, I already gave them an example right here. This is me. I said the quality of the text is not great. You will need to highlight an area of text to comment rather than specific words. Oh, I only got a 1 on that, so it didn't seem to think that was a great comment. But at any rate, here is the, like if I wanted to say something, I would highlight it like this. I'd make a comment, and then that's it. And the next person can make more comments. You can look at all of the conversations right here. So see, I can look at the next person's one. So someone made this comment, SP made this comment. This looks like a good comment. Yeah, they got it too. So you would read this. This is my student who always asks questions. I'm glad she got it too, but exactly, this is very typical for how she thinks about things. But then I would answer this, and say, oh yes, blah, blah, blah. And so students do that. Okay, and let me show you how it looks when it's better. I think the Moretti, I actually did the OCR. Let me see if I can, okay, or was it? Well, most of them. Let's go back to Fitzpatrick. Well, I have it up here. See where it says annotate text and annotate figure. It knows that there is text in this one. So when I click on annotate text, I can highlight text specifically. I could even highlight just one word if I wanted to and talk about that. So it's a little better. Anyway, that's all I really wanted to say. I would love other people's ideas, especially if you've gotten if you've worked with video, or if you've gotten the grade book to sync nicely, or anything like that. And I'm happy to answer questions too.
Yeah, I just threw 2 questions in the chat, but thank you so much for that. Lynn.
Oh, I see. Have you done this in French? Well, I mean, that class was in French, and some of those articles were in French, I believe, Bryant. And I did not, for that class, pay any attention to the AI grading. So I'm not really sure how that would work. I believe it does have languages, though. I think you can select languages in there, so it might be just fine. Do students have to sign up for anything extra? They do, sort of, but not really. Through Brightspace, once it's integrated, I think Bryant and his group had to sign up separately, but nowadays, 3 months later, everything is integrated nicely, and students just, when they have an assignment, they click on it, it goes into Perusall, and it signs them up through that, so they don't have to create a separate account. But that is interesting, because I knew the students who hadn't done the first assignment, because until they do that first assignment, they are not recognized in Perusall. Any other questions? I know Hypothesis is one that people use. Abby, I don't know if you've had experience with that, or Ecomma. And go ahead, Benjamin.
So I wanted to bring up the thing with Hypothesis, because I think I was in one of the first rounds of the OCDI back in May, and we used Hypothesis, and the process of getting connected to it seemed to be confusing enough that it like slowed things down. And that's like my only concern with this. You said you think it all works via Brightspace, but that is my big concern, is how much of our time is going to be taken like making sure that the students are accurate or well connected to this. So I'm really glad you said that it looks like it just kind of takes them on through Brightspace, because that's going to be, I tried to set something up with Hypothesis and I was like, you know what? Let's not even bother. And I decided, let's wait until this training and then I'll do the social reading activities. So.
That's right. No, I think you're right. And I know Abby, when she worked with them to do the Ecomma and other ones, it's something that they have to do at Vanderbilt and through Brightspace to connect it. And Hypothesis either doesn't have that API or they just don't. I don't know what. But Brightspace now is complete. You never have to worry about students being able to get in and all that. You might have to manually grade them or not grade them at all. That's what I had done in the past, is I didn't grade it. I just used it as a place to put the articles so that students could access them, and so that they would have this opportunity to kind of socially interact and read closely and make comments ahead of time. And I could read through the comments just to see where they were with things. So that's a perfectly legitimate way to do it. I'm just playing with this AI grading to see what it brings.
I have a question, please. And thank you, Abby and Lynn. It was fascinating. I appreciate it. But my question is, first, Abby introduced this platform for teaching more advanced French. And Abby, you introduced the platform for teaching content-related class. So I'm wondering how I can use this platform for more elementary levels and intermediate levels. This is my concern in applying these technological platforms, tools in my teaching. Can you reflect on that? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that for me, I haven't used it yet this semester, but I might use it next semester in like French, 2, like the second half of the year. Because you don't want it to get too tedious, right? Like highlight all of the verbs or highlight all of this. But you could do that and then have them talk in English at home, so that when you're in the classroom, they have all of their thoughts and feelings out. I haven't taught beginning French in a long time, and what I'm realizing that this year is they all just want to talk in English. They just want to talk and share their opinions and their thoughts. And if we could get that out of the way at home and give positive feedback, like, wow, you have so many great ideas, then maybe we could focus more on the language use in the classroom.
Yeah, that's true. I haven't taught, first years for a long time either, but I would say you don't have to. It's kind of a meta commentary on whatever it is that you've assigned them. So you could actually have them comment on the assignments. So let's say you assigned a textbook, a French textbook or whatever, and they had trouble figuring out, hey, I don't know how to use or conjugate this verb. They could just add that comment right into the text there. And then another student could respond, oh, it's done this way. That's the kind of comments and responses that I do get anyway. They're just about a different topic. And I think that's the kind of comments and responses that the physics professor who did Perusall was looking for. It's not always upper level thought. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just questions about what they're trying to do. And I do think the video commenting feature might be super helpful. So you could have them, let's say you had a video on, conjugating in the first person or whatever. They could make comments on that, at various places, and they wouldn't always necessarily be in the target language, although they might be. That depends on how you set it up.
I think that goes back to task design. So what do you want them to do? Or do you want them to specifically go outside of the text and find their own videos or look up the words themselves and just give them really clear instructions? And so that's what I'm working over on my end, is how to exactly to bring this down to the lower levels that sometimes the big open-ended questions aren't as useful.
Hey, that's a really good idea, Abby. Like let's say you gave someone, your class a menu, and you could just say, okay, I want every student to look up what, fruit de mer means. And you give everybody a different one, and they can comment right there on the image of the menu and give a translation for it or something. It just kind of gets them more, I guess, interacting with the assignment.
Yeah, thank you.
And I saw that, let's see, I was looking at, I'm going back through the chat. So we like it. I'm not sure. I did have a student say, how do students respond? The question was, how do students respond to this? I had one of my students say, oh, all my professors are making me use Perusall. And I thought, oh, that's funny. We all went through this online course development institute, so we're all doing the same things, but it's good. My students have responded well, but I'm really, I suppose at the end it might matter on the evaluations what they say, but honestly, I'm just gauging it on 20 years of teaching or more of teaching, and what is it like when I assign an article, and I walk into the classroom and it's quite clear that no one read it. Like, I hate.
And did this replace the discussion board? Because I remember we did that in your class, and I'm thinking this would be a more engaging way.
Yes.
Awesome.
For me, it does. There are some things that I use a discussion board for, because it's a bigger question, but for just a reading, I no longer have assign like, okay, so just say something about the reading in the discussion board. Now I assign, make these comments and responses, and it seems to be more pertinent. And I think students feel like they need to make it through the entire article for some reason. So they actually do. But I see a big difference. Whether they enjoy it or not, I'm not sure. And thanks, Bryant, for posting that thing on the CFT. So I did have to go through that process. I no longer ever have to go through that process. Now, I'm not sure why, whether it's because I once did it and so it's in my set of tools, or whether they've gotten it now so that you don't have to. But I think you do need to at least one time go through that.
We might have time for one more question or comment.
just going to answer this one more question on here that Benjamin posted. Is there any how to use Perusall tutorial via CFT we can link? Not that I know of. We just kind of used it in that institute, and I don't remember there being a video about it.
There is one that Derek Bruff put together, and it's sort of an introduction to Perusall and also Hypothesis. It's a rather large file, but that is available. I only have access to it through the box that we used through the OCDI, but
I'm sure they would share it though if you wrote to them.
Yeah. Brian, can I just and this is kind of a general question, and we're at time, so I'll be very quick with it. But the reason I ask that is a lot of these tools, I would like to have some kind of explanatory mechanism that I don't have to make myself. And I remember during the OCDI, they kind of brought this up, but they're really hard to find via the CFT website, like the videos that do exist or the explanations that do exist. And does anybody know if there is any kind of like general clearinghouse of explanatory websites or videos for tools that we have through Brightspace? Because it would just really help, because I find myself now and then even like linking the things that are more aimed at instructors than users, just because, it's a huge process to kind of like design your own personal tutorial for each of these.
I totally agree. And as far as I know, no. And yeah, they seemed a little resistant on even creating that. And not Derek, but just in general, it does seem like a lot of this could be, teachers. I mean, I taught myself how to use Perusall before it was part of the Brightspace thing. So, but it was a very elementary usage of it, and I still don't know how to. I'm not sure how to use it with the grade books. So, yeah, I think there's some work that could be done there. That being said, I do have a friend at Brandeis who all of their online stuff is linked to Vanderbilt because Vanderbilt has such a good Center for Teaching program on that. So I was shocked. I think we're in better shape than most places, but it would be nice if they just had kind of like a teach yourself how to do this course.
I've been encountering the same question of like, how can I help my students learn to do things when I'm just now learning to do them? And I'm using, so for example, we're doing a wiki project in Great German Works in English, and I've decided to use the platform SlimWiki. And what that has reminded me of is that oftentimes these websites actually have their own tutorials. And sometimes we're lucky enough to get them like geared towards students as well. And also, I don't know if this is legal, but man, YouTube is so helpful. There's like tutorials on everything from every perspective on YouTube.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. That video will be posted on our website for all of those who were not able to attend but are very interested to hear all about like social reading, social book, and Perusall. I'm sure they also have a lot of questions about how to incorporate it nicely if they have not done so already into their course. Next week, we will take turn and actually have the Language Panda Development Series about lesson planning, which is also very fitting. And the week after, we'll come back and talk about Flipgrid. So stay tuned and cannot wait to see you more. Thank you, guys.